Hey, how's it going? It's Simple Lines Anetta, May, and you know what? We missed something. We missed something in the last video that we want to just take the time to explain. I work with this guy. His name is Clark, and he's a bit of a problem. He'll do all the drawings and do all the prep work, and he'll write all the info to get this done. But then he'll go ahead and he won't even sit with me the entire time to make sure that I hit all the points. Oh, I need to take my medicine, or whatever. Anyways, it's not it's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. Anyways, so we missed something that we felt was worthwhile going after in the last video, and we were talking in the last video that the heel tends to come in, the heel away, if you will, and it comes in as it comes up, and this is technically external rotation of the femur. And what that does, it sets up the proper position for the foot to come together, come towards the other foot into what we call adduction, adduction. And that means that the foot will be set up for the next proper phase of motion, which we neglected to talk about. This is also reflected in the neurology because L2 to 4 nerves, give or take in some people, L2 to 4 nerves pair both hip flexion, knee extension, that part of the gait cycle, and then they also pair adduction. So it should happen. It's reflected in the neurology. It should happen together like that. So these step phases here, these movements, these paired motions, they are inherent and they're represented in the nerves. So that's a good thing. We want that. This is okay. But what that does, what we neglected to mention, is what brings it home and completes the cycle. When we do a hip adduction starting with external rotation, it will then create the opposite motion on the rest of the cycle. See, this part, this chunk right here is quite the opposite, because now it's going into abduction, ABD, abduction, and it goes from, so the hip is actually internally rotated here, there's a circle here, and then externally rotated, I got that wrong, externally rotated, internally rotated by comparison, externally rotated again. So there's some smaller circles within this. And what that does actually is when the foot gets to this part of it, it hits the right point. It hits where it needs to hit. So let me just clear this up a little bit. So what that means is, I did the wrong one. Okay, hold on. What that means is that when we actually get to the heel strike portion where this is striking the ground, that would help if I had a layer. There we go. If this is striking the ground, it's going to be on the correct surface to guide through the outside edge of the foot. That's a very important element. It's going to be more on this part of the surface. And so when there's a roll through, when we're going like this along the foot, when the foot is hitting the ground, it's going to go through here. If we hit too much in the center, if we're a little too linear with our step, it tends to go more through the middle, and we load excessively those fascia underneath the foot, whether that's muscle or that's ligament. In any case, because we're hitting a little bit more to the outside, because we're getting a nice circular motion in our step, adduction, abduction, internal, external rotation of the femur, we go on the outside edge of the foot and we load bone. We hit the bone and we create that nice domey, archy shape here. That's good. That's sustained and it's effectively loaded. It's effectively stretched in such a way that it can naturally contract and recoil and generate forward momentum. These are very important things, and it completes the cycle. It keeps us moving in the right direction so that we can properly load and unload those feet, which is cool. And notice too, there's circles within circles going on here. I think that's a cool thing. But as each foot strikes, it goes from here to here and here to here. So circles and circles. And I think the GOATA people, they call this a spiral, the spiral lines, which is a great name for it. One more thing though. So I just wanted to clarify that it creates a cycle, this method, and the way we bring the heel up and out, or in, depending on how you look at it. The way we bring that completes the cycle and makes it very involuntary for the player, the athlete, or whoever it is. Makes it much easier to create positive, effective, and potentially non-damaging body mechanics. It makes it way easier for them to do that. That's very important. But we also wanted to mention one more thing. And we went back and forth on this, whether this was relevant or not, but it is worth mentioning. So we're just gonna bring it out here with the divisions of the nervous system. Going back to that kind of detailed subject, it's worth mentioning that if L2 to L4 do one phase of the gait cycle, if they are doing the forward motion of the leg, getting the leg to that point, bringing the leg from this point to this point is the next chunk of the neurology. So if the lumbar spine really is doing hip flexion, knee extension, and the adduction movement, well, guess what? The next chunk down is doing the exact opposite. So for instance, about I'll say L5 to S2, give or take, is going to create what we know as the sciatic nerve. Now, some people might get on my case because it's like L4 in a lot of cases. That's cool. It's also coming through the front here, through that greater sciatic notch, and it'll create a few different nerves. So there'll be a superior gluteal somewhere around here, an inferior gluteal somewhere around here. But majorly, in a major way, sciatic nerve that splits off into two more branches, tibial and common fibular. So this big chunk here is going to do all the opposites, because guess what? It's going to hamstrings, for instance. Boom, right there, hamstrings. I'm just going to keep that real simple. It's going to the gastrocs, which I believe we covered to some extent in the last video. And it's going to the fibular muscles, the ones on the outside. And this is an important differentiation. So with those muscles that we just mentioned, it will create the hip extension. Again, oppositely, it's on the back, hip extension in blue. It will also create through the gastrocs the necessary plantar flexion. So it's gastrocs there, and that's important to push. We're pushing away, toe off, that part. And as well through the fibular ones, these guys a little more on the outside here, they will create the necessary heel or ankle. It will be basically going to the outside. You can call that abduction. There's a few different ways of talking about that, but let's just say it's going out if you're looking at it. So if you're looking at it from the back, the heel would be going like that way because of fibular muscles. They're going approximately like that. They're running that direction anyways. So this is important too for creating that arc. Now, I feel that the hip extension and plantar flexion, those are fairly obvious. But the heel portion, from heel to toe portion, this arc in here is a neat one and worth talking about. And again, noting the differentiation between the sides of the nervous system, the top and bottom of the lumbosacral plexus as a whole, the reason it's chunked up is obvious when you read it properly. So the sciatic nerve doing this guy, and then the tibial nerve doing this guy. And notice we have this separate chunk going to the fibular portion, and that serves another proof to an extent of the GOATA method, because those fibular muscles are going to be coming along the outside, and they're going to attach to this outside of the foot, and what they'll be able to do is bring it back this way when necessary. And notice this big arc, this big spiral that's going along the foot, outside edge, but it has to eventually come back to the big toe eventually. It's going to end up, and this is getting a bit funny, but it's going up, and the force will eventually travel out the toe. We wouldn't want to weight bear on the outside toes, so we do have to bring that back. So those fibular muscles are actually very important. Those outside true leg muscles are very important because they draw the foot this way so that we can eventually bring the force back to the middle portion, the medial portion of the foot, or the inside edge. So it's got to make that swoop. And again, looking at the way this is chunked out, it's very obvious that these are involuntary motions. These are well sectioned off neurology, and so they do have to be trained to some extent because they're not consciously done. The legs are really wired to be separate. You don't see the same thing in the arms. Just to make a comparison, the arms are very much made so that they can be used seemingly oppositely at all times. Basically every motion gets C5 to T1 more or less, whereas in the legs we can see a clear differentiation between one phase of the gait cycle and not. And this is why it's important to train running, walking, that kind of stuff, and spend a fair amount of time on it. Anyways, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that little revision wasn't too much for you. I had a good time. See y'all later.